Hello coaches and welcome to this edition of Give and Go Live. My name's David Newberry and I'm joined by my colleague Ian Barker. Hello Ian.
Hello David, hello coaches.
Well Ian, today we're going to do something slightly different on Give and Go. We're going to be looking at the theme of coaching the game, and we're going to look at the tactical perspective of creating attacking width. And to help and support us with this, we're going to be taking a video from the 2019 Women's World Cup, the game between England and the United States, the semi-final. And this has been provided to us by Instat. We'll see some stills from the game and we'll be able to discuss them. We're also going to use quick tactics and the canvases and the animation to help us describe to the coaches some of the tactical significance of some of the plays. Ian, we're going to talk about one of the principles of the game, width, and please, if you wouldn't mind, just talk a little bit about how significant width is in terms of the coach's knowledge of the game.
Sure, David, thank you. So these principles of attack and these principles of corresponding principles of defending are very much central to US soccer coaching tradition. There may be some nuances and changes in 2019's world, but these are still very much fundamental to what we coach at United Soccer Coaches. The first thing we want to do when we attack is try to hurt the opponent with a penetrating shot, dribble, or pass. That has to be supported with players around, and then the rest of the team are looking to provide width and mobility and disperse in order to stretch the opponent and counter the opponent trying to be compact. So I might use words like dispersal and width and mobility with senior players, older youth players. But when I'm working with maybe just little kids, I might just simply show them a closed fist and an open fist and say defenders want to be the closed fist, and of course attacking team wants to be dispersed and spread out, the open fist. And width is in the modern game is now applied differently. Sometimes we have wingers who get to the byline and cross. Sometimes width is provided by center backs as opposed to fullbacks. And certainly we see different ways of width being applied in the midfield. So it's a very contemporary and interesting topic in the attacking direction.
Well, Ian, let's now talk about some of the factors that lead to the success of a team developing width and establishing width during the course of the game. And on the right-hand side, we have a blank canvas, so certainly go and doodle away and explain if you can as we go through the list on the left-hand side.
Yeah, so just a starting thought, if the team I'm working with is attacking this direction. So at the end of this arrow, that would be where my goalkeeper is if we're beginning with the goalkeeper. And what we see now when we start from the goalkeeper is the end of these arrows are probably our two center backs, which allows, because they're willing to go really wide, perhaps our fullbacks to get higher. And now these are our two fullbacks hugging the touchline, but quite high up the field. One of our midfielders, if we're in a 4-3-3, would possibly be looking to receive the ball here. And then I've got my other two central midfielders here looking to receive the ball. And then up the field, my high striker. And then the key to this would be the displacement or the positioning of my two wide forwards. If my fullbacks are very wide, I like my forwards to be wide, but slightly inside the field to create some different passing angles. So what I've got now is, as I just shift colors really quickly, is if the ball goes to the center back and then on to the fullback has the ability to offer full width, but the pass they play up to their wide forward has a nice angle to it, or the pass inside has a nice angle to it. So I'm looking for sensible dispersal, but not everybody all the time on the touchline, on the sideline, but spread to still maintain angles of support. So this requires good starting positions. The concept of width is obviously relates to length and depth. So we have width, but we also have the number 9 high, and we're starting down at our goalkeeper. The quicker we move the ball, the tougher it is for the opponent to keep their shape, because as they move, we start to pull the opponents apart, and we'll see this in some of the stills we have later. I'm thinking of a 4-3-3 because some of our examples later will be based on a 4-3-3. And what we're looking to do again is we're looking to take that closed fist, if you will, the opponent in that compact shape, trying to hold to one side or the other or stay in a block, and we're trying to pull them apart by our positioning and ball movement. And then, of course, we should never forget at the highest levels, but certainly at the youth grassroots levels, is if players are holding wide positions but are not demonstrating readiness to receive the ball across their body and continue to play with good speed of play, sometimes we're not going to be effective using width because we don't have the technical component with our first touch and our body shape to take advantage of it.
So now let's go to some of the stills from the game. USA-England semi-final, and the first one, we've circled 4 players. This is our number 7, our wide right, our right side of the forward line. This is Tobin Heath. We have O'Hara, who is the fullback, the right side, number 2. And then we have our 2 central backs, who are number 4 and number 5. And then finally, the player worth pointing out who takes the throw to set up this attack is our left-sided defender number 3. And one of the things to note here is how spread out the US team is, and perfectly set up for a switch of play and an attack down the weak side of the England defense. Look how narrow the England defense is in comparison to how spread out the United States are, and by looking at the movement of those players, they are looking to get even wider as you see the movement over O'Hara and of Heath. Ian.
Thank you. So what's interesting for me is if the throw-in indeed came from here, from the left back, you can see that down the field, there were 2 players looking to receive it, one central midfielder and the left forward, but they're both just tucked in a little bit, again, to create that angle to receive the throw should it come their way. But in this particular case, the ball goes back to a supporting centre back who is again supported square by her colleague. What I think is really interesting is how high the number 7 and the number 2 have driven up the field. And the question we would ask ourselves is, have they driven so high because the white team, the English team, has dropped in? Or by virtue of the fact that they have indeed advanced, has that forced the English team back? So it could be a reflection of the opponent and the way they've set up quite defensively, try to keep a block, or it could be a reflection of the American positioning has driven the English back. What I think is very clear here is instead of having our fullback perhaps standing here, we've said, you know what, we're very happy with 2 versus 1 here. We've got some cover in our central midfield, so let's really be aggressive on the weak side and commit forward. And I think that makes for a very positive attacking posture.
On our second clip, now we see the ball has made its way across the back line, but the UK or the English team has managed to move and shift quite effectively to cut off the space on the higher midfield lines. And so here we have O'Hara, who has provided as much width as you possibly could ask her to, and then on the slightly higher position, Heath doing exactly the same. The one challenge here for the English team is that they're not putting enough pressure on the ball, and the result of this is a long pass into the space, and the English team has pushed so high up that there is space in behind and almost half a field in which for Heath to exploit. Ian.
Yeah, thank you, David. So I think this is absolutely a great analysis in as much as it looks like England is set up around this kind of line, which means there is a ton of space behind for the potential of that long ball. It's a little difficult with the still, but I think you can see here that this player is looking, her feet and her body and her hips are looking to the ball, but you could also appreciate that if she just drops her shoulder, she can indeed go behind. So she's showing a very interesting body position to check to or check away, which of course puts a ton of pressure on this player. And even our right fullback here on this side is not simply square to the ball. She's got herself open that if the ball was played across her right foot, she could quite easily just advance up the field. So I quite like their body positioning here. And then we see this player has not got drawn over to the ball, but she's maintained width. So if England does indeed get drawn over and start to apply pressure, this player is probably going to have a nice channel to run into as the play would develop down the flank.
Now we're on to our third clip, and again, highlighted here are the number 7 and number 2. Look at the position of the number 2 in relationship to where the ball is, the supporting angle, and how close in support she is in relationship to the other midfield players. So she's playing extremely high in support. And then using the white arrows, we've demonstrated how the English defense are starting to get drawn towards the ball because the United States was so effective in those really wide positions, which of course then creates space in other areas. Ian.
Yeah, what I particularly like about this photo is you can see the orientation of this English defender and the eyes of these two English defenders, and the fact that this fullback has got pulled out. So that width has really compromised the English back four. So now we can see that this player is essentially on if there's a long switch, would be fairly good shape. This player has the ability to go there or there, and that would be very challenging for the number 2. I also like the idea that if the ball is to play, we've got wide, we've pulled England across. If the ball goes here, she has the ability to play through this seam into a central player. So what you can see with this is how width and the sensible dispersal of the red team has really compromised the white team's ability to stay compact and has opened up all kinds of attacking opportunities, assuming that this player can retain possession. This support would help that. And it doesn't mean that this player still can't get to the byline and potentially cross. And now we've got 1, 2, 3 running in. So the options available are great, but the challenge for the white team, I think, is pretty clear from this diagram.
And Ian, it's just worth mentioning, this is the opening goal scored at the back post by press from across from the right-hand side. And so it's this movement of press into the position behind the right-sided fullback for England that creates that opportunity. Let's now go to the next clip. And I chose this clip because this shows you a perfect example of the movement of the right side forward, the number 7, not hugging and standing alongside the defender, but finding the space between the lines, so dropping back, but not dropping back as far enough to be able to be picked up by a midfield player. So she does an amazing job of finding the space. And as you can see here, as that ball is being passed to her, the English defence are running back at full pace, but she's ready to go. Her body position is open, and the consequence of that is she is going forward at pace. And as we know, Tobin Heath is rather sharp when it comes to dribbling with the ball. Ian.
So if we understand that the American back four and the 2 midfielders here are relatively competent defensively, it means that the 7 and 11 do not have to necessarily track back as far as they might, making them available for transitional opportunities. And David's absolutely right. When America breaks, by getting straight to the touchline, it really compromises this fullback. Because if prior to receiving the ball, the fullback was tight, then the ball could be played down the channel. So the fullback is compelled, this fullback is compelled to stay off and keep the back four of England compact. But it means that our winger now gets the ball free. And you can see that if we come out the other side, the corresponding left-sided forward for the States is in great position too. So great transitional moment. And then if we think back to the final, there was a goal that came through the central midfielder taking on a run at the top of the box. You can see how this player now is free to continue her movement in support of the number 9. So we'll actually get a support player here from central because our other 2 forwards have given us all this width to pick up the ball in great space. So I think this is a really nice picture of what effective transition could look like out of a 4-3-3.
And then here we have the moment when the goal is scored, and look how much room Tobin Heath has when she crosses the ball. And what's amazing here is the distance and the lack of pressure from the English defenders. And as you mentioned before, we got the three central defenders, or two central defenders and the fullback, all looking inside and not considering the run at the back post. Ian.
Yeah, I think if the English manager, Phil Neville, was to see this particular still, he'd be very disappointed. So the analysis of David is absolutely right. There's no pressure on this ball. So this player is of modest impact. The only thing maybe is she could cut out a driven ball. So very poor ending, and we can only speculate as to why the fullback didn't get out there to press. The other challenge is, again, the eyes of the English defenders and their body shape is back towards their own goal. So even though it's a 3v4 in the box, the English defenders can't actually see all of the red players. And so the red players can make all kinds of blindside runs, and they're attacking the ball that they want to put into the goal, whereas the English women are running back towards their own goal. So not only do we have width, but now we have width towards the byline, and now we're crossing with players, defenders facing the wrong way. So from my perspective, that's the most devastating type of cross for a defender to defend, as opposed to crosses that come from perhaps a little bit further upfield.
And it's worth mentioning here, Ian, the distance from these defenders are from the attacking players. This was probably the one of maybe a dozen attacks down the right-hand side throughout the first half, and the English defenders just gave them so much space. In the second half, completely different, much tighter, very few crosses, very few, a small amount of action from the right and left-hand side. So they did learn, but it took a half of the game for them to learn how devastating the United States were. Let's go to the next image, and this one is actually a counter-attack. The ball is won in the midfield by the United States. England are recovering, but the pace of Lavelle in the central midfield position to run around the English midfield girl provides a wonderful opportunity for her to run into space and terrify the two central defenders in the English team. Supporting her, as you can see just on the right hand side, is Tobin Heath again, as they are transitioning from defense. Ian.
Yeah, so what I think, building off of the previous slide about transition, if we look at our US back four having just defended quite compact, it looks like that our wide forwards have indeed tracked back to help out defensively, and there is our two holding mids. And what's interesting is, as our number 7 and 11 have broken wide, they would be obviously great transitional opportunities, but the width that they give, stretching the white team or the English team again, does create central passing channels. So by virtue of getting wide does not mean you necessarily receive it, but you're certainly assisting other attacking options by getting wide. If you have young players that get into wide positions and complain they're not receiving it, you might actually find a way of applauding them and saying, hey, you got wide, you pulled the defenders out and create an opportunity for your teammates. So deploying in wide positions doesn't always mean you'll get it, but it maybe creates great attacking opportunities for your teammates.
In the next slide, we see actually a rare attack down the left-hand side. The majority of attacks were down the right. But here we see the discipline of our number 11 staying really wide. Look at the way she is coming towards the ball and not running away. Many of our young players, they start too narrow, and so when the ball is passed like that, they're running with the ball towards the sideline, and that gives the defense the opportunity to organize. In this case, she's running from wide position, she's coming onto the ball, and then she'll be able to penetrate into the box at pace. Ian.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent point. So the ability to hug the touchline and then be able to drive in is quite powerful. You can appreciate that if she's standing here and receiving the ball when she receives it here, easier for the opponent to close down. And then that type of movement is not very satisfactory. That's a tough ball to get around and get crossed in. So what I would say to young players is make sure that at least on each flank we're attacking, we have somebody hugging the touchline. There's some interesting ways to teach this, but one of the ways you would teach it is, interestingly, not to make the field in training as wide as possible, but maybe make it quite narrow. So if you make the field in training quite narrow, let's say you bring it in maybe halfway between the big box and the sideline, now players appreciate the premium nature of width and will get into wide positions. Sometimes we try to teach wide play by having the field as wide as possible, and that actually doesn't encourage width. Quite the contrary. So when you're trying to get players to hug the touchline, bring the touchline in, and they'll value being there much more powerfully.
Now, I think this diagram shows the adjustment the English defence made. Now we have 1, 2, 3 players in very wide positions defending out wide. And of course, what this now does is provide the opportunity for the United States to play inside, and Ertz is making a tremendous run from midfield, exploiting that space right inside of the fullback and the left-sided midfield players. Ian.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as we see now most of the attacking options for the American team we've seen come from the right, and so people are flooding in from the left. If we think back to the very first clip, it was the left fullback who threw the ball backwards so the team could go out to the right. So you can see, at least on the basis of the evidence we've provided, that America wanted to build but get into the final third on the right flank, and it seems to come in attacking-wise on the left flank. Indeed, we've got really nice close support out here and good width, 3 of them, which has drawn out 3 opponents. So they're 3 on 3 there. And here we've got a jump, which now creates a great opportunity for maybe a passing channel. I would say that probably the failure of this player to track is the biggest breakdown of the English team here. But you can see this space here is very large because this centre back has not come out. This centre back has not come out. They've lost their fullback. And so here is all this attacking space for the US to run into. And it looks like the midfielder here has identified that and made that break. So that's a nice picture of how the overload has worked out for the US.
Okay, and our next diagram, we show another way to switch the point of attack. We used, the first example was a throw back to the defenders. You'll see that the the English central forward, the number 9, has actually taken a position to prevent that this time. And so now, with a bit of skill, a fair amount of skill, the ball is being thrown inside, and the central midfield player, the number 8, has now turned. And here we go again, O'Hara and Heath being in big space on the right-hand side, ready to attack. So again, the US have found another way to switch the point of attack, very tactical in the way that they played. And in this case, I believe the right fullback has been found by a long pass to the right-sided fullback, number 2. Ian.
Excuse me. Yeah, so once again, the desire to come out to this left side and bring numbers has drawn over a lot of the white team in defense. If this is the white striker, we appreciate that she's got the 2 red centre backs behind her, but she's probably preventing those centre backs going it. So the player on the ball could play here, but it would be very difficult for this player now to find, maybe that would be the pass she could play. But instead, because she's got the support here, she's got an option there, she's got an option there. But again, we've maintained great width. We've been very brave on the right side and held our space. To me, the pass here, assuming she can play it technically that distance, is going to be devastating for the white team, because that pass plays from what we're looking at here, 3, 4, 8 English players now have to turn and chase all the way out to the other flank. And by the time that's happening, I don't see any reason why that ball can't be played. So concentration to one side with a view to an effective switching of the point of attack.
So Ian, we've now looked at all of the very positive movements of the United States and their tactics in developing wide attack. Now into the second half, and I'm going to include this clip because for those of us who are English in this on this call and on this presentation, there must be some joy for us. And look here straight away, this is second half. The US have a throw on their right-hand side with their number 2. It's been rotated through all of the defenders out to their left-sided fullback, their number 3. But as they're doing that, notice a couple of things. Firstly, look how better organized the English defense seems to be in preparing for that weak side attack. And then the other thing is, as we'll see on the next slide, look at the positions of the 2 circle players. Done on the left, and then I believe this is press on the left in the number 11 position. And they're not quite as wide as the examples we gave in the previous slides. Ian. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
I move the slide.
I think I would agree. I think it's a little disappointing that at least one of them is not hugging the touchline. Because anytime they're in a little bit, it's reducing the amount of space that the English team has to deal with. I do like the fact that there is an angle between them. So this player is slightly inside of this player. I quite like that, but I think they could both be 5 to 6 yards further back, which would stretch things. I also think that we probably have one too many players here in support of the ball here. So from my perspective, this player could clear out, this player could stretch even further, and this one could come outside too. So I think there's a better way of dispersal here. Now, we don't know this particular time. I can't speak to the scoreline and the level of fatigue and things like that. So this might be a little bit of a harsh judgment, but you can see that the English team is in a fairly narrow block and not really looking like a ball could be played in there and hurt them, or a ball could be played in there and hurt them. And the Americans aren't looking to get around the outside. So right now, this looks like a slightly more favorable situation defensively for England as opposed to some of the other ones we've seen.
Well, now let's look at our last slide, Ian, because this plays through. And if you just remember, one of the challenges of that movement was that every player along the back line touched the ball. There wasn't the same speed and tempo of passing. Once the ball does make it out wide, though, interestingly, the player who was wide actually comes inside, and that was press, which, of course, helps to make the midfield a little bit more compact, and this leads over to a turnover. So final thoughts on this last diagram?
Yeah, again, don't want to be too harsh in the judgment, and I like the fact that the 11 has checked into the space. But what I struggle with here is, where is the supporting midfielders? And so when she receives it in here, what's she supposed to do with it? She could dribble back out wide. She could take the full back on. But if we look at the 3 English defenders here and the run of the number 9, that would be very tough. So it's all very well having it wide and getting it in this case to this channel, but again, no corresponding support. The only thing I might suggest here, and this would be a real challenge, is if she can play it and then overlap. So now the player receiving it has at least a couple of attacking options into the forward or into the overlapping fullback. But I think one of the challenges here, we've seen width, we've seen movement from outside to inside, some of the things we like, but we're not supporting it with decent midfield positioning and play. So I think that would be an example of where probably England are going to win the ball back in a 4v2, 5v2 situation.
So Ian, we've gone through quite a few different scenarios demonstrating width. We've seen penetration from the inside, which create width on the outside. We've seen ball movement across the back line to create space on the outside of the weak side. We see penetration up in the last third created by width. So we've seen lots of different scenarios from the same game. Please use this canvas here just to share with us your final thoughts.
Yeah, once again, I'm just going to kind of almost repeat what I said in at the beginning of the show. Goalkeeper here, we start to see centre backs being increasingly happy and technically able to get wide. Doing so, they allow the fullbacks to get higher and hug the touchline. And we're going to look again at a 4-3-3. Whether we play with one or two holding midfielders, they're able to receive the ball from the goalkeeper, potentially receive it from the centre backs. Let's in this case play with one high central mid. And now we've got our number 9, and then we've got our 11 and our 7. And again, for me, one of the key considerations is, I'm just going to change the color, is making sure that we have an angle here. So I'm very happy with the fullback being wide as long as the 11 is tucked in just a little bit. What I'm trying to avoid is a ball that has to be played straight down the sideline. That's something I'd be looking to avoid. If it does go into our centre back, he or she can find now the fullback. They could potentially see a passing channel into that slightly tucked in winger. Of course, they can go into the number 6 or number 8, and they can go back to our goalkeeper. So in that 4-3-3, as we build from the back, tons of opportunities established by the willingness of centre backs to get wide, the corresponding willingness of fullbacks to get wide, and then the sensible positioning of the 7 and 11 relative to the 2 and the 3.
Well, Ian, this has been a slightly extended give and go. We hope you enjoyed this new format. Coaches, please let us know. And if you like this discussion on these type of topics, please let us know the topics you might be interested in. And Ian and I would be more than happy to prepare a presentation on those topics. So thanks again for joining us on this edition of Give and Go Live.